They say marriages don't collapse in one thunderous explosion. Most of them erode quietly, like a coastline crumbling over decades until one day you realize the ocean has taken everything. That's exactly how my marriage of 30 years to Richard withered. Not in shouts, not in slammed doors, but in silence so thick it suffocated me. It began subtly. Little things so small I thought they didn't matter. The way he stopped asking about my day, how he no longer noticed when I cut my hair, how dinners became mute affairs punctuated only by the clinking of forks against plates. It wasn't until that one summer evening, in a kitchen I had scrubbed spotless and filled with the smell of homemade meatloaf, that the truth punched me straight in the gut. Richard set down his fork, looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You're just not fun anymore, Carolyn. I don't even know who I'm married to." His voice was calm, almost bored, like he was commenting on the weather. And the worst part? Our grown children didn't even react. Daniel chuckled awkwardly, glued to his phone, while Emily sipped her soda and talked about her new Pilates instructor like I hadn't just been gutted in front of them. I sat there under the soft glow of candlelight, realizing I had become a piece of furniture in my own home. Useful, familiar, utterly invisible. That night, lying in bed while Richard snored beside me, my mind spun like a trapped bird, slamming against every memory I tried to salvage. 30 years. 3 decades. I gave up my career dreams to build a life for this family, supporting Richard through every promotion, every setback, raising children who didn't even glance up when I broke in front of them. I tried to excuse him. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe life had dulled both of us. But deep inside I knew. A rot had set in, silent but deadly, hollowing out everything we once were. We were strangers now, wearing the familiar faces of the past. Still, the real knife came the next morning. As Richard dressed for a supposed early meeting, I glimpsed his phone light up with a message. A woman's name, a heart emoji next to it. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I simply observed, and the more I watched, the clearer it became. The late nights, the secret of texts, the smell of unfamiliar perfume lingering on his collar. He wasn't just drifting, he was already gone. But what cut deepest wasn't even the betrayal. It was how effortlessly I was discarded, how easily my years of loyalty, sacrifice, and silent endurance had been brushed aside like dust from a shelf. I realized it wasn't just Richard who saw through me. My own children had learned to look past me too. I had trained them to do it. Smiling through disappointment, serving love without boundaries, teaching them that their needs always came first. That night, standing alone in my kitchen, wine glass trembling in my hand, I flipped through an old photo album. There we were, smiling at graduations, hugging at birthday parties, laughing on sun-drenched vacations. Every photo, a snapshot of a life that had slowly abandoned me while I wasn't looking. I traced Richard's face with my fingertip in one photo. The boy who once brought me gas station flowers when we were broke, now a man who couldn't even feign interest in me. And there, under the weight of that silence, a thought struck me, sharp and cold. If no one noticed when my heart broke, would they even notice if I disappeared? Not with rage, not with fireworks, but with something stronger. A quiet final exhale. They think women like me stay forever because we're too soft, too forgiving, too scared. They mistake our patience for weakness, our silence for consent. What they forget is that silence isn't just the absence of noise. It's a language. And mine was beginning to roar in a dialect they would never understand, until it was far too late. And so, I started planning. Not for revenge. For resurrection. After that night, something in me hardened. It wasn't rage that coursed through my veins. It was something colder, sharper. A decision. I didn't confront Richard. That would have given him too much power. Instead, I slipped into the shadows of my own life and watched. I became invisible on purpose, a ghost haunting the edges of his carefully curated existence. Every late-night work meeting, every weekend conference, I tracked them with silent precision. I didn't have to dig deep. His arrogance had made him careless. The first tangible proof came one Saturday morning. He left in a rush, claiming a sudden breakfast meeting. 10 minutes later, I watched from my car as he pulled into a boutique hotel downtown. The kind reserved for stolen afternoons and whispered betrayals. I waited. Watched. A woman, younger, tanned, perfect in that hollow Instagram model way, slipped into the passenger seat of our car. My car, technically the one I drove our children to school in for years. Still, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I went home, brewed a pot of coffee, and pulled out the dusty manila envelope containing our prenuptial agreement. The one Richard had smugly insisted on when he was broke and ambitious, back when he joked that he had nothing to protect. I flipped through the pages with steady hands until I found it. Clause 12, Section B. In the event of infidelity, the injured party retains full rights to marital assets including, but not limited to, property, vehicles, and shared financial accounts. He signed it. He forgot about it. But I didn't. Over the next few weeks, I became an architect of my own freedom. Quietly, methodically, like I was sketching blueprints for a house no one else knew existed. I took photos of receipts tucked into his pockets, romantic dinners I hadn't been invited to, jewelry I hadn't received. I mirrored his phone to my old tablet using software a friend's son once showed me. Each message between him and his little paramour was another brick in the foundation of my escape. They were sloppy, lazy even. Can't wait to see you again, face blowing a kiss. Last night was amazing. Can't believe how good you make me feel, smiling face with hearts. Amazing. Good. Words he hadn't said to me in years. I could have confronted him that night, throwing the evidence in his face. But where was the dignity in that? No, I wanted something better. A plan not rooted in vengeance but in absolute, irreversible liberation. I began moving money quietly into a private account. I reconnected with an old college friend who now worked in real estate, and asked her to start looking for a small condo under my name only. I spoke to a divorce lawyer discreetly, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice like velvet over steel. I wasn't naive anymore. I was preparing for a battle Richard wouldn't even know he was losing until he was already defeated. Meanwhile, at home, I perfected my mask. I kissed him goodbye when he left, packed his lunches like always, even ironed his shirts, silent weapons of normalcy. And he, comfortable in his delusions, didn't suspect a thing. The beautiful part about betrayal is that it blinds the betrayer long before the betrayed. He thought he was winning. He thought I was still asleep. And as he made his clandestine plans for romantic getaways and stolen weekends, I was making plans of my own. But not just to leave. Not just to take everything. To become everything he underestimated. One evening I stood at the bathroom mirror, applying mascara for the first time in months. My hand was steady. My reflection stared back at me, not the wilted version he thought he'd crushed under years of neglect. No, she was still there. Sharper, smarter, stronger. And soon, very soon, he was going to find out that the woman he thought was boring, predictable, and easy to discard had been quietly setting fire to the entire foundation of his lies. He thought he had buried me. He didn't realize I was a seed, and I was about to grow into something he couldn't even recognize. Stay tuned, Richard. Your real adventure hasn't even begun yet. The final straw came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was folding laundry, his shirts, his pants, his socks with tiny holes he never bothered to replace, when I found it. A receipt tucked casually in the back pocket of his jeans. Not a hotel this time. A jewelry store. Not just any jewelry store, but the one downtown known for custom engagement rings. I unfolded the paper with trembling hands. Diamond pendant. Custom engraving. To new beginnings. The words sliced through me clean and deep. New beginnings. Not for us. Not for the woman who had stood beside him for 30 years. No, this was for her. The woman who hadn't scrubbed toilets at 2 a.m. to make ends meet. Who hadn't sacrificed her dreams, her body, her soul to build a life from scratch. That was the moment my grief turned to clarity. It was time. I booked the trip the next day. An exotic getaway he'd always dreamed of, but had never actually managed to plan for himself. Cartagena, Colombia. Sun-drenched beaches, colorful streets. Enough distractions to blind even the most suspicious of men. And I made sure it looked perfect. Luxury hotel reservations, spa appointments, private tours. Fake every single one. I created confirmation emails, fabricated booking numbers, and printed glossy itineraries. I used burner email addresses and dummy phone numbers. I crafted a fantasy so beautiful that even Richard, with his new beginning, would believe it without question. Meanwhile, at home I set the stage. I cooked his favorite meals again: pot roast, garlic mashed potatoes, cherry pie from scratch. I smiled more. I asked him if he was excited for the trip. He grunted, barely looking up from his phone, fingers tapping away messages to his secret lover. Good, I thought. Stay distracted. Stay stupid. One evening over dinner, I floated the idea gently. Maybe some time away would do you good, I said, passing him the butter without meeting his eyes. He perked up immediately, suspicion absent from his mind. You wouldn't mind? He asked, almost gleeful. Of course not. I lied sweetly. You deserve it. He grinned, that same cocky grin he used to flash when he thought he'd gotten away with something. I smiled back, the perfect portrait of the dutiful wife he thought he'd long since defeated. Inside, I was already packing his lies into a one-way ticket out of my life. Over the next week, I finalized everything. I transferred money into private accounts. I updated all the important documents. I secured the house and changed the locks, but not yet. Timing was everything. The day before his flight, I wrapped a small package: a travel guide to Cartagena, some new swim trunks, and a heartfelt note that simply read, "Find yourself again. I'll be waiting when you return." He had no idea how much truth that note held. Because when he returned, if he returned, there would be no waiting wife, no home filled with memories he had long taken for granted. There would only be the echo of his own betrayal, bouncing off empty walls. At the airport, I hugged him tightly, lingering longer than usual. Be safe, I whispered into his ear. He laughed, kissed my cheek, and rolled his suitcase away, swagger in every step. I stood there and watched until he disappeared past security. And then, standing in that bustling terminal full of strangers, I smiled. A real full-bodied smile that I hadn't felt in years. He was gone. The trap was set. And now, finally, it was my turn to start living. I didn't drive straight home. No, I stopped at a small cafe, ordered a latte, and pulled out the checklist I had been refining for months. Sell the SUV. Cancel joint credit cards. Freeze the joint bank accounts. File for divorce citing infidelity. Change the locks. Hire a moving company. Book my own trip. A cruise, a dream I had deferred for 3 decades. Every item checked off was a nail sealing the coffin of the life I was leaving behind. Richard thought he had escaped the mundane wife he had grown bored of. He thought he had traded up, upgraded his life. What he didn't realize was that the only thing he had truly discarded was the best thing he would ever have. And now? Now he was about to find out exactly what it felt like to be abandoned. Exactly the way he had abandoned me piece by piece for years. But unlike him, I wasn't leaving a mess behind. I was leaving a masterpiece. Richard's plane touched down in Cartagena under a blistering sun. He disembarked with the casual arrogance of a man who believed he had the world in his pocket, and a secret tucked safely in his suitcase. He didn't even think to check the reservations ahead of time. Why would he? His faithful wife had arranged everything after all. He breezed through customs, his leather carry-on slung over his shoulder, and hailed a taxi, reading aloud the name of the luxury resort from his itinerary. The driver gave a puzzled look but shrugged and nodded. Maybe he thought all rich Americans booked strange places. The first crack in Richard's fantasy appeared when the taxi pulled up to a dusty side street, lined with crumbling facades and graffiti-tagged walls. No shimmering pools. No marble lobbies. Just a cracked sign swinging in the humid breeze. Hotel Mar Azul, rooms available. Richard frowned. Maybe this was just the front office, he reasoned. Maybe the real resort was around the back. He grabbed his suitcase, paid the driver, and wheeled his way inside. The lobby, or what passed for one, smelled like mildew and cheap disinfectant. A worn-out ceiling fan spun lazily overhead. A woman behind the desk chewed gum and scrolled on her phone, barely looking up as he approached. "Reservation for Whitaker," he said. fishing the printed email from his pocket with the practiced impatience of a man used to being obeyed. The woman squinted at the paper, then at her computer. "No reservation," she said flatly, popping her gum. "There must be," Richard insisted, shoving the paper closer. "This is the address. I have a confirmation number." The woman shrugged. "No booking. Maybe wrong place. Maybe scam." That word scam punched a cold hole in his gut. But Richard, ever the master of denial, refused to believe it. "There must be a mistake," he barked, his voice rising, drawing the curious stares of two backpackers lounging nearby. "I'll call my wife." He yanked out his phone and dialed my number. Straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. Frustrated, he texted, "Babe, there's a problem. Call me ASAP." No reply. He sent another. "Something's wrong with the hotel. They don't have my reservation. Please check from your end." Still nothing. For the first time in a very long time, Richard felt a chill crawl up his spine, a suspicion he couldn't quite shake. He dragged his suitcase down the block to a coffee shop with spotty Wi-Fi, ordered an overpriced espresso, and tried to access the tour package website I had included in the itinerary. Page not found. He tried the hotel confirmation link. Error 404. Panic bloomed in his chest, hot and suffocating. He tried to rationalize it away. Maybe the hotel had a glitch. Maybe the tour company went under. Maybe, but deep down he knew. He just didn't want to admit it yet. Hours passed. The Cartagena sun beat down mercilessly, turning the streets into ovens. Sweat soaked through his dress shirt. His expensive loafers blistered his feet. Finally, desperate and sunburnt, he checked into a hostel a few blocks away. A dingy building with peeling paint, rickety beds, and a single working fan that sounded like it was powered by a hamster on a wheel. Maya, his shiny new beginning, was furious. She hadn't signed up for this. No private tours. No luxury spas. Just a cheap room, no AC, and the growing stench of failure clinging to every fiber of their clothing. They fought. Loudly. Maya demanded explanations. Richard stumbled through half-truths, excuses, and promises to sort it all out tomorrow. But tomorrow came and there was no rescue. Only more heat, more mosquitoes, more glaring looks from Maya. On the third day she left. Took the last of the cash and caught a bus to the airport, leaving him alone with a dead phone battery, a melting credit card balance, and no one to blame but himself. Meanwhile, I was reclining by the pool of a luxury cruise liner, sipping a mojito and watching the sun dip behind the horizon. Free. Alive. Untouchable. Richard's text messages kept piling up in the inbox of a phone I had long since powered off and dropped into a drawer. Pleading. Accusing. Begging. But I wasn't listening anymore. For the first time in 30 years, it wasn't my job to fix his mess. He had walked into this disaster thinking he was escaping a life he found boring. Instead, he discovered something far worse. The crushing silence left behind when the person you took for granted finally stops waiting for you. And the best part? He still had no idea just how much more was coming. 3 days later, a broken shell of the man who had once walked out with a suitcase full of confidence stumbled back home. Richard looked like a ghost. His shirt was stained with sweat and dust, his shoes scuffed beyond recognition, and his expensive watch, the one he had once proudly flaunted at business dinners, was missing. He dragged himself out of the taxi with a battered duffel bag and a face that had aged 10 years in one miserable week. As he approached the house, the one he thought he'd always have, he spotted the boxes immediately. 9 of them, neatly stacked on the driveway. Each one labeled in bold, unforgiving letters. Richard Clothes. Richard Office Supplies. Richard Personal Items. There was no welcome home. No porch light left on. No scent of meatloaf wafting from the kitchen. Just the suffocating stillness of a life that had moved on without him. He staggered to the front door and rang the bell, desperation clinging to him like the humidity had in Cartagena. Inside, I took a slow sip of my coffee. I had been expecting him. I had rehearsed this moment. I opened the door just enough to see him through the screen. He looked at me with wide, stunned eyes, like a child realizing for the first time that consequences are real. "Carolyn," he croaked, his voice cracking like dry leaves. What is this?" I didn't flinch. I didn't soften. I just leaned against the doorframe, my arms crossed, calm as the eye of a hurricane. "This," I said evenly, "is the life you asked for." He blinked, confused, searching my face for any sign of mercy. He found none. "You can't just kick me out," he stammered. "I live here." I tilted my head slightly. "You used to live here," I corrected. "Now? Now you live wherever those boxes take you." His face twisted in anger and disbelief. "But we're married," he blurted. "You can't just erase 30 years like that." I smiled, a small private smile that held decades of pain finally finding its end. "I didn't erase 30 years, I said. "You did. One lie, one neglect, one betrayal at a time." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out that could fix this. "You packed up my whole life," he said hoarsely, as if it was only dawning on him now. "No," I said quietly. "I packed up the part of my life that was dragging me down." He staggered back a step, as if my words had landed a physical blow. He looked down at the boxes like they might attack him next. For a long moment he just stood there, frozen. Finally he tried one last time. "Carolyn," he said, softer now, almost pleading. "Can we at least talk? Please." I shook my head slowly. "Talk was something you ignored for years," I said. "And now?" "Now I'm not wasting another word." I closed the door gently, not slamming it, not making a scene. Just a soft final click that echoed louder than any argument ever could. Through the peephole, I watched him sit down heavily on one of the boxes, his head in his hands. There, in the fading light of the evening, Richard finally looked as small as he had made me feel all those years. I turned away. I didn't watch him gather his broken pieces. I didn't watch him call for a ride, or struggle to load his boxes into a rental van he probably had to beg someone to co-sign for. Because this wasn't about him anymore. This was about me. And I had finally gloriously chosen peace. Inside the house the air smelled clean, fresh, free. I brewed another cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the sun set without a single ache in my chest. Outside, a truck pulled up to the curb. 2 movers hopped out, loaded the boxes without ceremony, and drove away, taking the last remnants of Richard Whittaker's reign with them. And just like that, my house was mine again. My life was mine again. And I realized, the thing about being invisible for so long, when you finally step into your own light, it burns brighter than anyone ever expected. Especially the ones who were too busy looking elsewhere to notice you were a star all along. The next evening the doorbell rang again. This time it wasn't Richard. It was Daniel and Emily, my children, my blood. Standing on the porch like they were bracing for a storm they didn't know how to weather. Daniel's arms were crossed, a defensive shield. Emily clutched her purse tightly against her chest. Her face unreadable but her eyes wide with something close to panic. I opened the door slowly, not stepping aside. "Mom, we need to talk," Emily said quickly, her voice strained. I nodded and led them into the living room. The same living room where they had once built forts out of couch cushions, where Christmas mornings had exploded with laughter and torn wrapping paper. Now it felt heavy, weighted down by the conversation we were about to have. They sat on the couch, stiff, uncomfortable. I remained standing. "Why would you do this to Dad?" Daniel demanded first, his tone sharper than I had expected. "He's devastated, Mom. You humiliated him." I tilted my head slightly, studying my son. The boy I had held through countless fevers and heartbreaks. The man who now looked at me like I was a stranger. "I didn't humiliate him," I said calmly. "He did that all by himself." Emily leaned forward, her voice pleading. "Mom, whatever's going on between you two, it doesn't have to be like this. You could have talked to us." I laughed, a soft, sad sound. "Talked to you?" I echoed. "When was the last time either of you really listened?" They both flinched. Not visibly, but enough that I saw it. I tried, I said, my voice steady. I hinted. I reached out. I waited. But neither of you wanted to see the cracks. It was easier to pretend everything was fine. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. But sending him away, packing his stuff, blocking his number? That's not normal, Mom. No, I agreed. It's not. But neither is living invisible in your own home for 30 years. There was a long stretching silence. The kind that presses against your ears and makes you painfully aware of every breath you take. You didn't tell us, Emily whispered. You never said how bad it was. Because I didn't want to taint your childhood, I said quietly. I wanted you to have good memories. I thought, if I held the broken pieces together long enough, you would never see the fractures. Their faces softened, but they still didn't fully understand. How could they? They had been loved too much to ever notice the cost. Daniel's voice dropped. Is it true? That Dad cheated? I nodded. More than once. Their mouths fell open. Shock, pain, betrayal. All flickering across their faces in rapid succession. And you stayed, Emily said hoarsely. For us. For a while, I admitted. But eventually, I stayed because I forgot how not to. Tears filled Emily's eyes, but she blinked them back. Daniel rubbed his hands over his face, stunned silent for once. I'm not asking you to choose sides, I said after a moment. I love you both. Nothing changes that. But I won't apologize for finally choosing myself. I saw it then, the tiny shift in them. The first crack in the wall of assumptions they had built about who I was and what I was willing to endure. Emily got up first. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around me tightly. I'm sorry, Mom, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Daniel followed, awkward but sincere. He gripped my shoulder, a silent apology passing through his touch. I didn't know, he said simply. I didn't see. I know, I murmured. And it's okay. Because now you do. They didn't stay long after that. They needed time to mourn the parents they thought they had. Time to recalibrate the truth. When they left, I stood at the window watching them drive away. The house behind me wasn't empty. It was full of truth, of new beginnings, of air finally cleared. I sat down with a glass of wine, stared at the stars peeking out from the evening sky, and thought, sometimes the hardest battles aren't the ones you fight with others. They're the ones where you finally stand up for yourself. Even if the world you built trembles and falls around you. And for once I wasn't afraid of the ruins. I was ready to build something stronger. Something real. Something mine. The decision came quietly, almost like a whisper carried by the morning breeze through the open kitchen window. It wasn't impulsive. It had been growing inside me for months, years perhaps, like ivy wrapping itself around an old fence until it finally breaks it apart. I was going to sell the house. The place where birthdays were celebrated and arguments whispered through thin walls. The place where I had packed school lunches and hidden anniversary gifts. The place where I had slowly, painfully become invisible. One afternoon I found myself standing in the middle of the living room, spinning slowly, letting my eyes roam over the familiar details. The worn spot on the couch where Richard used to sit. The faint scuff marks on the hardwood where Daniel and Emily had raced their toy cars. It was all history now, pressed between the walls like forgotten photographs. I picked up my phone and called a realtor. Hi, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. I'm ready to list my home. There was a long pause, as if even the realtor could sense the weight behind those words. Congratulations, she finally said. I'll be over tomorrow to walk through the property. I hung up and sat on the floor, not the couch, not a chair, the floor. My palms flat against the cool wood, grounding myself. This was happening. Not because someone told me to, not because I had no other choice, but because I chose it. The next days blurred into a series of small, silent victories. I packed up Richard's leftover belongings, the things he had once cared so much about but had left without a second glance. Golf clubs, designer ties, books about leadership he never truly practiced. Each item went into a box labeled with a single word. Past. The house began to look different, lighter, freer. almost breathing again after years of being suffocated under roles I never agreed to play. I called Daniel and Emily and told them. "But Mom," Daniel said, confused, "it's the house we grew up in. It's the house where I gave everything I had," I replied gently. "And now it's time to give something back to myself." They didn't argue, not really. They were still adjusting to this new version of me, the woman who didn't bend just to keep the peace. The realtor came the next morning. She was young, efficient, with a kind smile that didn't drip with pity. After a walkthrough, she turned to me and said, "It's a beautiful home, Carolyn. It'll sell fast." "Good," I said, meaning it. Within a week, offers poured in. I chose one from a young couple, newlyweds expecting their first child. The thought made me smile. Let them fill the rooms with fresh laughter, new beginnings. Let the house become a home again. The day I signed the final papers, I stood alone in the empty living room one last time. I pressed my hand against the wall, feeling the hum of all the memories still hidden in the cracks and beams. I didn't cry. I didn't second guess. "Thank you," I whispered, not to the house, but to the woman I used to be. The one who survived here, who endured here, who loved here even when it broke her. Then I turned and walked out, pulling the door shut behind me with a soft, definitive click. The sun was setting as I loaded the last box into my car. The sky was streaked in hues of deep gold and burnt orange, as if the universe itself was painting a new chapter for me. I didn't have a mansion waiting. I didn't have a grand plan laid out in fine print. I had a small sunlit condo across town and a list in my notebook titled, "Things I Want Just for Me." Sketching. Mornings with jazz music. Fresh flowers on the kitchen table. Laughing without apologizing. Mushrooms on pizza. Simple things. Sacred things. As I pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back. Not once. Because the life behind me had ended not with a crash, but with a whisper. And the life ahead of me was wide open, waiting. And this time every choice would be mine. The condo was smaller, quieter, and smelled faintly of fresh paint and possibility. The first night I slept there, I didn't dream of Richard, or the kids, or the house. I dreamed of the ocean. Waves crashing wild and free, erasing everything old from the shore. I woke up smiling for the first time in years. The sun poured through the wide windows, lighting up the hardwood floors and the empty walls still waiting for memories. No voices demanded coffee. No phone buzzed with texts about errands or groceries. The silence wasn't hollow anymore, it was luxurious. I made a pot of coffee, strong and rich, and sat barefoot at my little kitchen table with a blank notebook and a blue pen. Across the top of the first page I wrote in big looping letters, "What Carolyn Wants." Felt strange. For so long, my life had been shaped by what everyone else needed from me. What did I want? I started simple. Grow herbs on the balcony. Take a watercolor class. Eat ice cream for breakfast if I felt like it. Say yes only when I meant it. Travel somewhere without asking for permission. The list grew and so did my smile. In the weeks that followed, I moved slowly, deliberately, like a woman learning how to dance again after forgetting the steps. I unpacked boxes one at a time, decorating not to impress anyone, but simply to make myself happy. Fairy lights across the balcony. A vintage record player spinning old jazz records. Walls filled with framed sketches, my own sketches. I was no longer living inside a curated life designed to impress Richard's colleagues, or make family Christmas cards look perfect. I was finally living inside myself. On a Saturday afternoon, I walked downtown and wandered into a little art supply shop tucked between a bakery and a bookstore. The air smelled of paper and possibility. I bought myself a brand new set of paints, a thick sketch pad, and without even thinking twice, a plane ticket. 3 months from now, a solo trip to Italy. Florence, to be exact. The birthplace of Renaissance art, of rebirth. The woman behind the counter smiled as she rang up my purchase. "New project?" she asked. "New life," I answered, and we both laughed quietly, like it was a secret too beautiful to say out loud. Not every moment was easy. There were still nights when loneliness curled up beside me like an old ghost. Sometimes I'd reach for my phone, instinctively wanting to call someone, anyone. only to remember that rebuilding meant enduring some empty spaces too. But instead of crumbling, I breathed through it. I learned that solitude wasn't the enemy. It was a classroom, teaching me how to sit with my own heart, to hear my own voice without interruption. One evening, sitting on the balcony with a glass of wine and a half-finished sketch of the skyline, my phone buzzed. It was Emily. Just a simple message. Thinking of you. Miss you. Dinner soon. Tears filled my eyes, not from sadness, but from the quiet miracle of being remembered, not because I was needed, but because I was loved. We made plans for a weekend dinner. No drama, no agendas, just two women trying to reconnect across a bridge of old wounds and new beginnings. As the stars came out, I leaned back in my chair and looked up at the sky. It was vast, endless, and for the first time it didn't feel frightening. Felt like an invitation. My life wasn't smaller now. It was wider, deeper, richer. I was no longer Richard's wife. No longer Mom the fixer. I was Carolyn Whitaker. Artist. Traveler. Survivor. Woman reborn. The world didn't owe me anything. I wasn't waiting for someone to show up and give me permission to live. I had already given it to myself. And tomorrow, when the sun rose again, it would find me still here, still standing, still reaching for the sky. And this time not for anyone else. Just for me. Was almost funny if you thought about it long enough. After everything he had done. After years of absence wrapped in presence. After betrayal so casual it barely needed lies. Richard still thought there was a door somewhere he could knock on and be welcomed back. The first message came 3 weeks after I moved into my new place. It was short. Hi. Can we talk? No apology. No ownership. Just a man throwing a pebble at a window he wasn't sure was still there. I didn't respond. A few days later, another. I miss you. I wondered if he even knew who he missed, me, or the version of me that had been easy to ignore. The version that folded laundry, smiled tightly at dinner parties, and let herself be erased one compromise at a time. Still I said nothing. Silence had become my armor, and it was stronger than I ever imagined. Then one night there was a knock on my door. Soft, hesitant. Not the insistent pounding of a man who thought he had rights. The tap-tap of someone uncertain he deserved even to be heard. I opened it halfway. There he was. Thinner. Tired. Older. Not in the gentle way of time, but in the sharp, hollowed way of regret. Carolyn, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Please. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. I just want a chance, he continued, wringing his hands. A chance to make things right. There was a time those words would have melted me. A time when I would have rushed to offer comfort, to shoulder the blame for his failures, to make myself small enough to fit inside the box of his guilt. But that woman was gone. Make things right. I echoed, my voice calm even. For who? For you? For your image? His shoulders sagged. I was lost, he admitted. I made mistakes. I didn't realize how much you did for me. How much you held us together. I shook my head slowly. No, Richard. You realized. You just didn't care until it cost you something. He flinched. A real reaction. For once he didn't have a clever comeback. I can change, he said desperately. I can be better. I believed he could, just not with me. Healing wasn't built on dragging old wreckage into new spaces. It wasn't built on hope that the same seeds, planted in the same poisoned ground, would magically bloom into something better. I don't hate you, I said quietly. I don't even wish you harm. But you and I were different people now. I'm not a placeholder anymore. I'm a whole life. Tears filled his eyes. For a second he looked like the boy he once was. The one who brought me gas station daisies and wrote silly notes in the margins of my textbooks. But nostalgia is a liar. It only shows you the beginning, never the middle, never the slow bleed of years. He reached out almost instinctively, and then dropped his hand back to his side. I just thought. He began. I know what you thought, I said softer now. You thought I would always be waiting. But I'm not. The air between us pulsed with everything unsaid. He nodded once, stiff and small. I'm sorry, he whispered. I know. And with that, I closed the door. Not with anger, not with spite, but with the quiet finality of a woman choosing her own peace over someone else's chaos. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, letting the silence settle deep into my bones. It wasn't sadness I felt. It wasn't triumph either. It was freedom. Later that night, I sat on my balcony with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, staring up at the endless sky. For the first time, the future didn't terrify me. It was a blank page, a clean canvas. And this time, the story I would paint would be mine alone. Months passed like whispered chapters in a book I was finally writing for myself. There was no grand announcement, no parade to celebrate my rebirth. Just small, quiet victories stitched together day by day, each one reclaiming a piece of me I had long abandoned. I sold the SUV, opened a new bank account in my name alone, painted the second bedroom of my condo a soft, daring shade of teal and turned it into an art studio. Every morning, sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors like a blessing, and I would brew a cup of coffee, sit by the window and sketch whatever my heart demanded. I launched Sketch and Soul, my online art shop, without fanfare. The first order came on a Tuesday morning. A woman from Oregon buying a print titled Unfolding. It wasn't about the money. It was about proof, tangible, undeniable, that I could still create beauty out of brokenness. Emily and Daniel visited sometimes. The conversations were awkward at first, filled with pauses and unsure glances. They were still mourning the illusion of the family we once pretended to be. But over time, something unexpected bloomed between us. Something truer, rooted not in obligation, but in mutual respect. One evening, Emily stayed late after helping me hang new shelves. She curled up on the couch, sipping tea, and said almost shyly, "I'm proud of you, Mom. I hope I can be half as brave." I smiled and touched her hand. "You already are," I said. As for Richard, his shadow faded with each passing season. He called once more. Left a voicemail I never listened to. I deleted it without guilt. Not out of anger, but because he no longer occupied any space inside me. One afternoon, while cleaning out old boxes, I found a dusty envelope buried under receipts and expired warranties. Inside was a list I had written years ago. Dreams for later. At the top of the yellowed paper I had scribbled things like, take an art class in Italy, a swim in a hidden cove, a watch the northern lights, dance barefoot in the rain. I laughed softly, tracing the faded ink with my finger. Later wasn't promised, I realized. Later was something women like me said when they were too busy holding everyone else's dreams together. But now later had arrived. And it belonged to me. I booked a ticket that night. A solo trip to Florence in the spring. No excuses. No explanations. Just a woman, a sketchbook, and a heart that had finally remembered how to beat for herself. The night before my flight, I stood on my balcony, the cool wind kissing my face. I looked out over the quiet city lights and whispered into the darkness, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular. Not even to the past. But to myself for surviving, for fighting, for daring to choose life over quiet erasure. When the plane lifted off the next morning, carrying me toward a place I had once only dared to dream about, I didn't feel fear. I felt weightless. I watched the clouds drift below me like soft promises and smiled. For the first time, I wasn't running from anything. Not heartbreak. Not loneliness. Not even regret. I was simply running toward myself. And this time there was no going back.